For the first time since 1943, the National Assembly has passed a comprehensive bill seeking to reform the Nigeria police. The bill seeks to provide a more efficient and effective police force that is based on the principles of accountability, transparency, and protection of human rights, as well as fundamental freedom.
That's right, a dream many Nigerians have yearned of for decades. Joining us now to give us an update on the bill and how it will reform the police is police reform advocate Okechukwu Nwanguma and human rights activist Esther Uzoma. Good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning.
Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Now, this Police Reform Bill 2020 was recently passed by the House of Representatives in July, I believe. Now it's being transferred to the President for assent, correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, you know, the bill which seeks to reform the Police Act, CAP P19, has not had a comprehensive review since 1943, which is quite amazing at this point. Now, would you say, in your opinion, the revisions in the bill meets expectations of Nigerians at this point? I'll start with you, Mr. Okechukwu.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by pointing out that the efforts to review this bill has been a long-drawn one, starting from 2004. Shortly after Nigeria returned to civil rule, after nearly 17 unbroken years of military dictatorship. So the need to review the Police Act, which is actually a colonial, a colonial law, became one of the prominent demands by civil society, especially considering the role that the Nigerian police played under military rule. So the demand for police reform was quite high, and the effort started as far back as 2004. And that effort involved a lot of public engagements, public consultations, and an audit of all the laws that pertain to policing. By 2005, the first draft bill was submitted to the National Assembly, but it never really, it didn't pass. And so this effort had continued up to 2018, when another set of bills were presented to the both chambers of the National Assembly, the Senate and House of Representatives. The 8th Senate under Saraki did a lot, demonstrated enough commitment to ensure that the bill passed, and actually did pass that bill in 2018, but unfortunately it failed in the House of Representatives. So the effort started all over again in 2019, and then here we are. By June 2020, the Senate passed the bill, and in July the House of Reps passed again, and it is significant because this is the first time since 1943, when the Police Act came into force, that both chambers would pass the bill and then harmonize. So the stage where we are now, when we have gone through all the legislative hurdles, will be to forward the bill to the President for assent. Now, concerning as to whether it meets expectations, I would say that a lot of interests have been involved. There are a lot of interests in the bill, from the police, to the presidency, to all the organs of the executive, even to civil society. So it's been difficult trying to harmonize these varied interests. So what you have in that bill is actually an effort, is an outcome of compromise of all the interests involved. There are certain things that civil society would have wanted to see in that bill, which if we insist it gets into that bill, it may not be passed, or the president may not assent. So to the extent that we have for the first time come up with a bill to repeal what is actually a colonial law is, for me, a major achievement. We cannot, it's not a perfect bill and doesn't have to be, but let us for the first time even move away from the colonial legal framework that continues to govern policing in Nigeria, which is responsible for the abuses that we find in the police. So to that extent, I think that we have made a fundamental, is for me a significant development that we have now have a comprehensive review of the Act. So, and I'm sure that in future that there is room for improvement and further amendments.
Okay, let me bring it to you, Esther Uzoma. Well, you listen to Okechukwu there. He says it's not perfect, but is impressed with what we have so far. For you, how would you describe this bill? Does it address, the consistently low human rights compliance rankings of our Nigeria police force and the efficiency of the force?
Thank you very much. Now, for avoidance of doubt, let me put it on the table that the bill, rather the Police Act is not bad, because it is a colonial law. It is bad because it has failed to meet the realities of the present time. All right? To that extent, not just because it is colonial, it is bad because it does not serve our purpose any longer. Now, looking at the bill itself, it made quite some progressive, provisions. It provided for some progressive, innovative, provisions. For instance, particularly concerning women, the tenure of the IGP. For the first time, the Inspector General of Police has security of tenure. It is proposed in that bill, all right? 4-year term certain. Before now, the IGP existed. His tenure was at the pleasure of the president. But now we have certainty of tenure. It is believed that if we have certainty of tenure for the IGP will no longer politicize or prostitute his position to the political party in power because he has security of tenure. We watched how Sanusi bared his chest to Jonathan, said all sorts of things. Because he has security of tenure, the president could not sack him, even when he differed. And so it is believed very strongly by members of the civil society that if the IGP has security of tenure as provided for in this bill, that the office of the IGP will no longer be, a red zone, that the IGP will no longer prostitute himself to any political party in power, that he will have a mind of his own or her own, and that this will now cascade throughout the Nigeria police force. This is very critical. It is critical because we have watched the role played by police and people who dress as policemen in our electoral process and in our everyday life. And so we welcome this and see how it pans out. As for enforcement of rights, one of the granted liberties, one of the functions in this new bill proposed is that the police will guarantee liberties. When we are talking about liberties, we are talking about international conventions and provisions of the constitutions. We are simply talking about fundamental rights. You see, the Senate, the House of Reps proposed, for instance, that the police will also will vet companies that want to be investigative companies or dictative companies. These are expanded roles, but they are very, very welcome. Particularly the emphasis on the role of police in protecting civil liberties. Civil liberties. We can talk about civil liberties all day. In the absence of civil liberties, believe me, we become a banana republic. So it's like reinforced, because it's a repeal and reinstatement, reminding the Nigerian police once again of their classic role. And then we'll look at other generic provisions like non-discrimination on the basis of gender.
All right,
so
Ms. Esther, I'd like to just cut you off here for a little bit because we're going on a short break. But when we come back, I'd like to take you on the security of tenure that you just mentioned for the IGP. Apparently, I glossed through the review and I saw that the longest serving IG is 3 years. So when we come back, I'll take you up on that. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us is Okechukwu Nwanguma and human rights activist Esther Uzoma. Thank you for sticking with us, Esther. Well, before we went on a break, you were talking about the tenure that has been included in the new revision, the newly revised Police Reform Bill 2020. And you mentioned that one of the things that you think that is great is the security of tenure for the IGP. Now, while I reviewed that bill, I saw that the longest serving IGP has served for only 3 years, with some even just serving for 1 year. Now, can you just address that a little bit further?
Yes, thank you very much. You see, in the human rights community, it is a common belief that the political quagmire, the tsunamic elections that we experience, over the years, several reports have actually indicted the police for being complicit and working in hand, with the powers that be. And so part of the reasons after extreme forensic analysis, from workers, in this group is that, from development workers is that the fear of existing, the fear of functioning at the pleasure of the incumbent perhaps is what propels the police, to prostitute their services to the government or the political party in power. And so you find, ominously coincidental that any party in power somehow controls the police, somehow determines who goes to court, somehow, or who is charged. And so we reasoned and proposed that it would be fine, just like other, executives, that the Nigerian police should have security of tenure. The IGP should have security of tenure so that fear of existing at the pleasure of the president, at the pleasure of the city, is no longer there. It is our firm belief and persuasion that this particular provision will have a cascade, a ripple effect on all aspects of policing, political, and then eventually will affect our politics, will affect our justice delivery, and so on and so forth. And so, for the first time, you rightly noted that the longest serving of the IGP served for 3 years. Some served even at 1 year, always at the pleasure of the president. And so we want an IGP who is strong, who is independent, who exists at the pleasure of the law. All right? So that is why I believe it's a significant provision.
Mr. Okechukwu, what is the high point for you in this bill? How important is the security of tenure for the IGP? And just to add to that, some have said for them, the high point is the fact that the police can now recruit by itself and not depend on the Police Service Commission. How important are these two revisions?
Well, talking about security of tenure, I think that leadership is very key in how professional and how efficient, any police force is. And the best practice is that the chief of police in any democracy must have operational autonomy, must enjoy security of tenure, and be able to, security of tenure means that the IGP is able to do long-term visioning and planning. But when an IGP is appointed by the president and can be fired by the president, the loyalty of that IGPs is usually to the president who hires, and he knows they can fire him at any moment. But when there is security of tenure, he knows that he has a tenure of 4 years, as has been recommended, in this new bill. He gives him that security. It gives him that time to plan, to do a long-term visioning and planning. His loyalty is to the law and to the people through elected representatives, and no longer only to the president. And so we think that this is a very important, part of this bill. Now, concerning the issue of recruiting, you know that this has been a long drawn, subject of disputation between the police and the Police Service Commission. Now, the House of Representatives, in its own version of the bill, ceded the power to recruit to the police. The Senate version was silent on that, but in the harmonized bill, what we have now is that the police will, now handle recruitment, which is why at the moment, recruitment is going on. And this matter has been a major issue of contention. And I think the problem arises from the confusion in the establishment, the laws establishing these different entities. The law establishing the Police Service Commission gives it the power to appoint police officers, except the IGP. And the Police Act, as it is, also gives the police the powers to recruit. So you see, that confusion has created, which is why the matter went up to the court, and the High Courts ruled in favor of the police that, by their own interpretation, it is the police that has the powers to recruit. But of course, it's still a matter yet to be resolved, because I understand that the Police Service Commission, either they have gone to court or they are planning to go to court to challenge the ruling of the, but what is important for us is to ensure that the guidelines for recruitment, why it is important that this controversy is resolved. It is important for us to ensure that the guidelines for recruitment is followed, scrupulously, to avoid a situation where the wrong people find their way into the Nigerian police, which is what we see that happens often. So for us, the recruitment process is important. The leadership appointment procedure is also important, which is where the Police Council, Nigerian Police Council, comes in. Part of the provisions of the bill is also that, the Police Council is a constitutional provision. The Police Council has the power for the general supervision of the police and for policy. It's actually the highest policy-making body for the police. And it is expected to meet periodically to advise the president on appointment of an IGP when there is a vacancy. But what we find is that over the years, this council never meets, which gives the president the sole power to appoint an IGP. And so it makes the IGP, this is one of the major bases of politicization of the police. So we believe that if the Police Council plays its role as provided in this bill to meet and play an active role in the appointment of the Inspector General of Police, and by the way, the governors of all the states are members of the Police Council. It also gives them the room to meet and receive reports on the security situation in the country and advise the president. So that is why this bill is important. It expands the duties of the Police Council to ensure that the president is not left with the unilateral power to appoint and fire an IGP, which makes the IGP beholden to the president and feels that he's accountable unto the president and not to the law and to the people.
Now, Mr. Okechukwu, we only have about 1 minute before we go on a break, but I wanted to ask you about the retraining. I believe that the bill also mandates the IGP to retrain these police officers, which I believe is one of the biggest problems that we have in the police force as well. In your recommendation, how often should these officers be trained?
Can you answer that again? I didn't get that.
Okay, I was talking about the bill and the mandate of the IGP, which requires the IGP to ensure that these officers, the police officers, are trained and retrained, including their mental and psychological state. I'd like your take on that. I believe when we come back after the break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us is Okechukwu Nwanguma and human rights activist Esther Uzoma. Thank you for staying with us. Now, before we went on a great break, Mr. Okechukwu, I was reviewing the IGP's mandate, which requires the IGP to ensure regular training and retraining of the police staff, which I believe is one of the biggest things that we need for the police force. Now, in your opinion, what would be your recommendation for the frequency of the training for the police staff?
Yeah, training is one of the key, aspects of policing that ensures that, professional efficiency is enhanced. Training is important to enhance operational efficiency and to ensure that the operations of the Nigerian police are in line with modern democratic policing norms and practices. And the bill, part of the because the bill actually did the current act didn't really itemize the functions of the IGP, but this bill provides for the functions of it. It outlines the functions of the IGP, which includes ensuring training and retraining. Yes. And it also requires that the Inspector General of Police, must, work closely with the Police Service Commission to periodically review the training, contents, the training curriculum, and and manuals for the training of police officers. This is very important. Now, you find that people ask questions. Why is every now and then trainings are conducted for the police by human rights organizations, by police? What is even the content of the training in police colleges? Yes. I know that not long ago, some development partners with civil society in Nigeria did work to review the police training manual. Now, whether this manual is being used to train the police is another question. The other question is, what is even the state of the training institutions? Are they fit for the kind of training that's required for professional, policing? But the other question is also the question of there are people within the police who seem to be untrainable. And this also takes us back to the whole issue of recruitment. Because when you circumvent the recruitment process and recruit people who are not trainable, you see that training then becomes, it makes no meaning. But when the process is followed and the people who are fit and qualified to be in the police are recruited, training would then make a lot of sense. So I think that training is very key, both in terms of human rights and other aspects of policing and law enforcement. So this is one of the very important provisions that the bill has tried to so it is important that the police IG will work with the Police Service Commission as required by the bill to ensure that the training content of the police colleges are updated every 5 years, so that they are up to date with modern policing, to ensure the enhancement of professional efficiency and operations that are in line with human rights.
Okay. Esther, back to you. I mean, training and retraining the welfare of the men and officers of the police force is not cheap. It comes with funding. How much of financial autonomy, how much of financial provision does this bill give to the force? And secondly, does this address, the welfare issues of the men and women?
You see, beyond funding and welfare issues, I strongly propose the feminization, mark my words, feminization of security in Nigeria, from the police force, the Nigerian Army, the Air Force, feminization of security beyond the issue of funding. Because there's a feminine approach to security that is currently obtained across, it's a fantastic process that we have not imbibed. We are still of the view that security and law enforcement is about muscles. The world has moved from that. The use of technology, the use of intelligence, all right, that is where the planet Earth is. Regrettably, Nigeria is still at that stage of what? Muscle. So beyond welfare, if we do not feminize, we must make deliberate. And when I'm talking about feminization, I'm not talking about employing more females. That is part of it. But beyond that, the gentlemen, those our strong husbands, our strong brothers, must take a feminine view. Because the way a woman approaches security is almost as if she's not doing anything. But her information gathering apparatus is next to none. We must deliberately imbibe this in the training manuals, in the recruitment that my brother, my comrade, Okechukwu Nwanguma talked about. Feminization of security in this country, particularly in the Nigerian police, is key beyond the issues of funding, because it will affect the issue of funding. A woman makes do with what you give her and makes the home fantastic. A woman makes do with what. So if we don't bring in this attitudinal change, it doesn't matter how much we give to the police. It doesn't matter. It must be a deliberate attempt to teach. It must be a deliberate attempt to cultivate evolving attitude. It must be a deliberate attempt to present that front so that when you come into a police station, first of all, you feel safe. You don't feel that you are in the midst of wolves. You feel that you are in a home where you are welcomed. We must deliberately we must infuse femininity into our security. That is the way the world is going. That is how it is done. So issues of funding, welfare, they are important. But if we do not bring in this critical change in attitude, because right now, we are running a predatory system. Predatory. We have a force that preys on Nigerian citizens. Look at the number of enforcement of fundamental rights. Against who? It is Nigerian police. So that must change. That must change before we now look at, funding, because it doesn't matter how much we bring. If things do not change, then it doesn't matter. Give them the whole of CBN, it will still be that old Nigeria police. So I so submit.
Very good point, Ms. Esther Uzoma. I mean, the feminization of security, I looked through the bill, I didn't even see a lot of that in the bill. Now, Okechukwu had mentioned that, there are some revisions that the civil society would love to include in the bill, and I believe that you might have more points there. So besides the feminization of security, which you have rightly pointed out now, do you have any other revisions that you think that could have been included in the bill?
Well, I think that if you go down... is that for me or for
That's for Ms. Esther, please.
Okay,
and then you can answer the same question afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. There are generic provisions in the bill that guarantees fundamental rights. Non-discrimination on account of gender. Perhaps it was so couched so that we do not also run contrary to Section 42 of the Constitution. While you are trying to include the female, you not discriminate against the male. But there are international instruments. These are even local legislation that insists that you must deliberately, it's called positive discrimination, deliberately ensure that women are brought on the table. Like Okechukwu said in his opening salvo, we have come a long way. This is the first time this is happening, but there's still so much to be done. Efforts must deliberately be made to ensure that we have as many females as males in the Nigerian police. The provisions in the regulations that, give limits women in terms of when to marriage, constrains their liberties to marry and live in the barracks and all that. Of course, we now that the bill has been revisited, the minister, for instance, for the first time, has been given the power to make the regulations. Because in all other departments of government, it is actually the minister, the civilian, that evolves regulations that will guide the implementation of the law, be it INEC or whatever. So now that we have a minister who will make regulations, and he now has, if this bill is eventually assented to, he now has the anchorage, he has the locus to make regulations that will ensure gender equity. Gender equity. So these are my very, very profound, anxious aspirations.
All right, very good. Mr. Okechukwu, I'd like to take you on that as well.
On which one now?
On the other revisions that you think that could have been included in the bill. For example, you stated that the civil society had a few revisions that they would have loved to include in the bill that were not accommodated. Well,
like I did say, there were a lot of things that civil society would have liked to see in the bill, which couldn't go in, and there are also things that the police, prefer to see. Things that if we consider that if we put them there, the president may not like them. For instance, if we had the proposal that civil society, made concerning the appointment procedure, what we wanted to see was to include in the bill an appointment procedure for the IGP that is transparent, competitive, and merit-driven. And by that, it would require that the Senate will have to screen. But you see, we couldn't go that far because that would mean taking away from the president the sole power he enjoys to appoint the the Inspector General of police. There were quite a number of other such progressive provisions that we couldn't push too far. So, which was why we reached the compromise of let us even strengthen the role of the Nigerian Police Council to get more actively involved in the appointment process, so that it's not just the IGPs calling alone. And then, of course, talking about discrimination, I think the bill has a provision that prohibits the discrimination of any person on account of gender. For example, even though there's no law anywhere that says a woman cannot stand as surety for a suspect, but the bill decided to include that to make it clear that you cannot refuse a woman coming to stand as surety for, simply on account of her being a woman. There were quite a number of other things, but because just like I said, so many interests are involved in this bill, and so it was a question of give and take, compromises, understanding that it is important to, first of all, redefine the vision and mission of the police and to bring the operations of the police in line with modern democratic practices, which for me is one of the major achievements that this bill has made.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. We would have liked to talk about even the implementation should this eventually become law. But thank you so much, police reform advocate Okechukwu Nwanguma and human rights activist Esther Uzoma. Many thanks for being on the show this morning.